Melapress live Q&A. Before we introduce today's guest, a few housekeeping items. We do these live streams every week on Thursday at 4 p.m. Central European Time and at 10 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Like and subscribe to get notified of future events. And if you have any questions about WordPress or whatever we're discussing today, you can always ask us during this session and we'll answer them live. Before we start, Tim, the first time I met today's guest, Tim, is 10 years ago at WordCamp Edinburgh 2015. I was part of the organizing team. It was held, because I was looking a bit back, it was held at the Skyscanner offices back in Edinburgh. Yeah. I was part of the organizing, and you had a talk about REST API, and you explained basically if that would change the world. So yeah, in terms of experience, Tim, you spoke at a lot of WordCamps, you contributed to core, or still contribute, organized meetups, developed plugins, been a developer. Of course, you have a lot of experience in WordPress security, a lot to share about WordPress security. In fact, you are in the process of launching your WordPress security course. By the way, for anyone who subscribed to Tim's course, please excuse him a bit because he was supposed to upload this today, but had some problems. But yeah, he showed up today here, so please excuse him. And according to my friend's Nathan podcast, he's also a Doom speaker. So yeah, Tim, how are you?
I'm okay. That's a pretty amazing introduction. Yeah, it feels such a long time ago, 10 years ago. Yeah, it also really quickly went. But yeah, that was a very weird WordCamp. I think I spoke 3 times at that one event. Because I ended up on a panel and I ended up doing a lightning talk as well. So by the end of it, I was very, very tired, and I just started a new job like the week before.
And you used, actually, because I used to go also to the meetup in Glasgow. You came up a couple of times there as well, no?
Just to I did. I was really fortunate that just before that WordCamp Edinburgh, I started working with a company called wp-config.php, who were a hosting company in the UK. Yeah. And I was really lucky to be able to partly design my job. And so I made it I had the grandiose title of the platform lead and developer advocate. And what developer advocate actually meant was Tim could piss off around the country and go to various places and do talks, which was fantastic. And it worked for the company as well, because we obviously got a lot of people weren't necessarily expecting somebody to travel to their local user group. And it did lead to some interesting moments, turning up to WordPress Preston, and the only 2 people there were me and Mike Little, the co-founder of WordPress.
Oh, that's interesting.
And not the organizer of WordPress Preston, because they hadn't come.
Okay, interesting. But it is for people who don't go to meetups, or it does lead, not just about business, even because I always say, I've been to a lot of WordCamps, meetups and stuff. I apart from, of course, business and other benefits, I've also made some real friends. Actually, I've made some real friends who I still talk to nowadays.
Yeah, I mean, I think if I was to sort of look through my close personal friends, a lot of them were found in this community.
Yeah,
and that is partly because actually the WordPress community is quite friendly and open. It's partly because the way that we did comment, not so much now, but we used to have. Certainly in the UK, meetups absolutely everywhere. I think that I worked out that I'd been to 26 different meetups in a year. So that's 26, not 26 events, that's 26 different meetups in 1 year, doing a little road tour. And at each one, there'd be new people, new faces, but they themselves were their own little mini communities. And yeah, it's a fantastic way to build sort of open source software. And I guess even non-open source software. I didn't actually manage to get to it, but if you come across Tailscale, which is like a mesh VPN service, they run a meetups for people, and there was one in London just recently, and people seem to really, I'm thinking, oh yeah, WordPress, I can sort of understand why you would gather around it. Tailscale is a VPN network. And yet they had 90 people go to the events.
Wow.
That's just for drinks.
Because sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's partly because they knew that there were 89 other people who were going to be at least vaguely interested, probably quite technical, that they could go and meet with. And it's similar with the WordPress stuff. You got a bit more of a broader audience. You used to go to some groups and go, and there'll be lots of people there going, hello, here's my laptop, please help me with my WordPress site. But then you'd be meeting from other companies and your peers, and it's a really good opportunity. It's sad that we don't have as many user groups as we used to.
Yeah, it is. It is. In fact, especially for someone like me, I work from home. So to me, like once a month, I need to go to a meetup because it is at least a social event kind of thing. So you still meet people. Yeah, I talk about work, of course, and workers, but mostly it's more a social event. Before we dive in, Tim, for those who don't know you, can you please introduce yourself?
So my name's Tim Nash. I'm either a professional Doom speaker, if you've ever come and seen me speak, or a WordPress security consultant, if you haven't heard me speak. My day-to-day job is helping people basically harden and improve their sites. I specialize in doing things like hack site cleanups, but I also do security reviews and audits and vulnerability testing for both WordPress sites, but also code bases, so people's plugins and themes. I've been doing this for actually, I think I've been using the statement WordPress security consultant for only about 5 years, but I have been involved in security like nearly 30 years, and have been in the WordPress space for well over 20 years. So I've been around the block quite a lot. And I like to think that I'm able to at least communicate things vaguely in a way that most people can understand, which is why I've also just started doing courses, which is what we were alluding to before, which I'm busily uploading content for that course. Actually, not right now, because I think that would be affecting my bandwidth. But after this, in fact, hang on. Not right now, but after this, I will be uploading some material.
Good. Thanks. So yeah, let's start. Most probably, I wouldn't say an obvious question, but can you walk us through the process of what you do? If someone comes up to you, a customer, and says, I think my website is hacked. So what do you do then?
So the first thing, normally when this happens, I have a client come and say, I think my site's hacked. They're panicking. So the first thing is to sort of like bring them down and actually ask the question, why? Why do you think this happened? And you'll be surprised how many people come to me saying their site is hacked, and they leave with actually, you just needed some TLC on the website. It's just a bit slow. It's not hacked. No, that plugin is just broken. That's not. I had one who was adamant that they'd been hacked because they could see the word hello appear on every page. It's like, no, that's some developer who's put some debug code in. That's not that your site's not hacked. Well, assuming that we get feedback and they're sort of giving me symptoms that does sound like a hack, whether that's we can see a load of Japanese SEO spam in actually, and when we go and look in Google, we can see pages that shouldn't be there. Whether that's when we go to our checkout, we can see that there's this extra credit card form that shouldn't be there. We can see that there's this huge spike in our server resources. We can see pages being hit. We don't understand why. The next step is to go and actually see if we can see we look at the traffic first, which normally you'd think you'd jump to the files, but it's really worth spending just a few minutes just looking through the traffic access logs to see if there's anything obvious. Oh, look, there's a lot of going to this random file, ae424.php. It gives you somewhere to narrow down. Next, we verify the checksums for WordPress core and plugins and themes. Now, that works brilliantly for things that can be checksummed, that we can get the checksums for, but obviously third-party plugins don't necessarily come with checksums. Some do publish it, and it's fantastic when they do. Whenever they do a new release, they actually publish their checksums to go alongside it, but not everybody does. If we get anything coming back from those, we'll go and have a look. Otherwise, it is a fun exercise of find the PHP files that shouldn't exist. Once we start seeing one or two of them, we actually stop at that point and say, right, you are hacked. Let's go into remediation. Usual places to go hunt first, wander into the plugins folder And these days, you are almost certainly, if the site has been hacked and has been open on the web for a little while, you're probably going to see something like API key, a folder called API key or similar, a very obvious folder that shouldn't exist. And you can start going, you do get a feel for these. But you can try using an antivirus software if you've got it. Immuno 360 is okay with its latest rules. Make sure you've got the latest rules down, but it won't pick up most things. If you're using something like ClamAV, you're going to have to put some custom rules on there. I have my own set of Gyro rules that I basically just load through ClamAV if I can, which speeds up this process massively. But there are times where you're on hosts that don't have anything and you are just manually going through and cursing the day that they were like, why do you not have SSH? Why are you making me use this? It's like the toss up between, is FTP quicker or should I use their online file manager? I don't know which one's actually going to be better here. And those are just frustrating days. Once we found the site's been hacked, though, the procedure is nearly always the same across the board, which is a variation on nuke it and start again, which sounds terrifying, but actually can be done fairly quickly. But yeah, it's easy once you know what you're looking for to go and find it. But the important thing is to not do what 99% of people do, which is they find one file, delete it, and say, we're done.
I was going to say that. Do you do some sort of work where you try to at least trace back what happened? So, because of course, like, as you said, like if you just delete the file and someone has some sort of backdoor, obviously they're going to create it again. Like, do you do that sort of process?
So even going back through, even if you were to do a proper log analysis and go back through, you're probably still going to miss some of the backdoors. What I tend to find is that sites get compromised and then a backdoor is put on them. And then nothing happens because the bad actor leaves the site for a period of time because they want to see if their backdoor is going to be discovered. If it's not, then chances are what they're actually going to do is sell on your access. They're not going to exploit it themselves. They'll sell it on down the line. At which point the next person comes along and the first thing they do is go, well, I'm going to put a backdoor on this because almost certainly the original bad actor will have sold it to multiple people. So there'll be multiple attempts now accessing the site. The result of this means that you quite often will be even if you found something that you thought was the back door, it won't be the original one because the original one was probably well outside of the log times. The really smart bad actors are making sure that they leave the back doors in there for at least 28 days. Why? Average log rotation, 28 days. So you won't have that in the logs at that point. What you can tell from the logs though is what's being exploited, and you can see where individual files are being changed. What you won't be able to see easily, and this is where things like your activity log plugin works, is you can't see anything that's being done by users. And a common technique is for a bad actor to, especially on an e-commerce site, create a customer user and just add themselves some extra capabilities to that user. Or the lazy ones will just give themselves an administrator role. But the sneakier ones will just add the capabilities from the administrator role onto their perfectly normal looking customer. At which point, you wouldn't be able to see that in your normal log files. Because what you're seeing is a perfectly normal looking set of interactions occurring. You would be able, but if you were to use something like activity log, you'd be able to go, well, hang on a minute. That user shouldn't be able to do that, or that. And if you've got alerting set up, this also helps because you can then be able to say, that user definitely shouldn't have been able to do that, but at least I've got an alert saying that a new plugin has just been installed. So it is worth going through and spending the time. But for most people, the cost benefit of me doing the log analysis, it's almost never worth it unless we're in a position where we're seeing repeated offenses. And I am much more in favor of, okay, we're going to wipe all the files and rebuild from good sources than I am trying to cherry pick, well, I'll just try and delete that one file. I'll just try and delete that one file. Because if you go that approach, you're never going to win.
Interesting. You mentioned a very good point, by the way, because you mentioned the plugin and the logs. I always tell people it's not the first time we receive emails, especially when they're evaluating the plugin, but can I see this? Can I see it? It's important when you're doing this type of analysis, you have a number of log files you can work with. One solution usually is never the answer. You have a plugin, you have the access log file, you have also the error log file, because usually most backdoors are not exactly the best written. So you see a lot of errors coming up. Say, oh, why do we have this error? And stuff like that. Very interesting. So when you say you kind of like restore the website from a reliable source, but if there was a security hole before,
not restore. No. So
exactly.
You know how most people talk about backups and how
I know, and that's exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah. No. Backups are not useful.
Yeah.
Backups. I'm the sort of person who has to go on a stage and say, backups, take good backups, and then I'll come onto stage immediately afterwards and go, but they're not useful for security normally. There are a couple of times where you might have to restore from that backup. If you have had a ransomware attack, for example, where you are completely locked out, you can't access any of the current data, you can't get forward, and the only way forward is basically to not only burn things, but actually have to rebuild from scratch. You've got to start somewhere. You can start from that backup and bring that in to at least get the database. But when I'm talking about trusted sources, I mean literally going back to the source. So if we've got a list, so we would list out the plugins that are on the site and then go, okay, where can we get these plugins from that we trust? Now, if they're from WordPress.org, we can go, okay, we could just download those through WordPress.org or through one of the other distributions that we now have, because we are now in a position where we can do things like that. It's quite nice. But if it's a premium plugin, then you can go to that premium plugin site and say, I need a copy of that. If it's custom code, we're in an interesting problem. We then have to decide what we're going to do. Now, hopefully that custom code is beautifully in some sort of version control and separated away from the site. And we're happy with that. We can pull that down and say, we trust this. If we just, cowboyed it on the server and someone was sat there in Vim and it was typing away on the server, and that's the only place that code lives, we need to then take that away, isolate it, and ideally code review it back before we'll let it back on the site. Normally, that doesn't happen with plugins. That's normally themes. Because what you find is somebody will have created a theme so we'll have got a theme from like WordPress.org or even Theme Forest, and they will have downloaded it, installed it, and gone, this is great. I want it in red. And rather than creating a child theme, what they'll go and do is hack the CSS in the theme. So when we come along and say, yeah, we're just going to restore that, we'll pop on a new theme, the theme we've got from whatever source they originally got it from, and they go, yeah, but it's blue. It's like, yeah, it is. Sucks. At that point, you then have to go back and say, okay, right, well, now we get you a child theme and we can redo those customizations. But yeah, the usual place where we get that sort of like where it becomes a problem is where they have hacked through their and it nearly is always themes that they've hacked something like that. And it's a good learning lesson for them, as the way I like to think of it. They're obviously a bit of a harsh learning lesson. But yet never restore from your backup, because all that's going to happen, even if you restored a week ago, well, the vulnerability is still there, even if you try and fix everything. And the chances are you're restoring a backdoor as well, bearing in mind that we're sort of saying backdoors can often sit there for 28 plus days before it's abused. Well, what are you going to do? Load a backup from 2 months ago? Some sites that might be fine. But your average, if you've got a site that's like an e-commerce site, you absolutely can't lose 2 months worth of data. So we still do have to fiddle around with the database. But yeah, no, don't restore from backups. It's not a good solution.
It's a very good point. It's also, as you said, you might restore an already hacked version of your website. I mean, there have been even big companies which took them, I forgot which ones, but some companies took like 6 months to realize that their website has been hacked, or one of their web applications. So if you have 6 months of backups, all of them, they're like problematic. Most probably you don't keep numbers, but just out of curiosity, what are the most common sources of hacks you see? Like
in terms of what, so the most common by absolutely a quantum mile, the usual way that every site gets hacked is because they haven't kept things up to date.
yeah,
So
outdated software.
yeah. So now the individual how that hack happened varies,
Yeah.
but the ultimate root cause is a plugin or a theme had a vulnerability that was exploited that could have been prevented because it could have been patched. The irony being obviously that when a vulnerability is discovered, a patch is created and a new version is released. And we encourage plugin developers to tell people that it's a security release because they need to get a hurry on and update. Obviously, bad actors can read as well.
Yeah.
So they just go for, and there are plenty of bots that just trawl through looking for the word security update. Building proof of concepts has also become quicker and easier. We can thank our AI overlords. People ask if there's like how AI has affected security, and I think this is the one area you can truly point to and say it really has changed, and that's that you can go from somebody saying, "Oh, there's a vulnerability hit in this, we need to update it," and it being exploited. We used to measure that in like weeks at one point. And even a couple of years ago, I would have been saying you have a couple of days to update. And now we're measuring those sort of, for popular plugins, if there's a way to exploit it, that would be now measured in hours.
Yes,
So sometimes not even your daily update might not be enough, which is quite a terrifying thought. But yeah, keeping things up to date absolutely is the best way to avoid being hacked.
Yeah, it's almost instant nowadays. And it surprises me because it happens even to us. Sometimes we receive support requests like, "Oh, we have this problem. Like, what version of the plugin are you running?" Or they send us the system information and you can see all the versions of plugins they're running. Some people have like 2-3 years old plugins. Like, listen, since then we released 15, 16 updates, not just us, even other vendors. Like,
and your security vendor. I have seen a site, which I think the worst one I ever saw had 89 plugins, of which the oldest one was 8 years old. Of the 89 plugins, 9 of them had been closed by WordPress.org for security issues. And the scariest part of all of that site wasn't actually compromised.
Well, okay, this is okay. So they were lucky more than because
yeah.
Because the question usually is when you see these things, it's more of when it's going to happen rather if it's going to happen, right? I mean,
even if you're when you're doing your sort of risk assessment as a company or as an organization, whoever, if you have a website, you really do have to start from that basis anyway, and you should be asking yourself, okay, when we're hacked and compromised, or when we have a continuity issues with service, how are we going to cope and what we're going to do? Because if you do the prep work early, you're going to save yourself an awful lot of headaches and harm. Because if you're trying to think about all the things you have to do while you're panicking, then it's sort of a bit too late and you will miss things. So if you can sort of pre-plan and go, okay, we need to know what's running on our site, which is like the idea of a software bill of materials. We need to know what plugins we're running. We need to know where we got them from, because you'll be amazed the number of people who just don't know where stuff came from. And some of that's because the developer put it on there and it's like, okay, who's the developer? Yeah, it was this guy from like 6 years ago. It's like, okay, is it your license? What license? That's what I thought.
Yeah, we see it a lot as well when supporting people with support tickets. It's unfortunately very common. Some people, it's not that they don't know from where the plugin is coming from. They don't even know why it's there. Like, oh, I didn't even know it was. I don't know what it's used for. It's just, and you highlighted a very important point. It's good to have. When I used to work for a big software company, I used to be a systems engineer, and we used to have what we call the disaster recovery plan. Back then, I was still young. I used to make fun of it because we had to like document a lot of stuff, keep backups. But when we were hacked, once we were hacked, yeah, you realize how effective it is, because as you're saying, usually if you are hacked, first thing, you're going to panic. So you're not going to, okay, from where to start. But when you have some sort, I'm not saying every WordPress website should have like a complete documented disaster recovery plan like enterprises have. But as you said, you should have some sort of repository or something, or at least a document, and maybe a copy of all the plugins you're using, maybe even if they're outdated, but at least, you're going to install them and then update them right away. But at least you have something to start with. Because when you're panicked, you're not going to,
yeah. And I mean, it makes sense for a lot of, I think one of the reasons people sometimes struggle with security is security on the whole is less about tools, and people want to make it about tools, because if they make it about tools, that's something they can install and configure and then not have to worry about it. And so much about security is about process and about people and about making sure that the people know what they're meant to be doing and making sure the people are doing what they're meant to be doing. And yeah, documenting stuff, as boring as it is, and this is a little bit where I like sort of look at things like compliance, various compliance standards, which if you want to be bored stiff, go read an ISO document on various stuff. And you don't need to go to that length. There are some businesses that have to. You don't have to go to that sort of length, but just thinking about it and going, okay, how do I I take these backups. How do I restore them? Yeah. If I'm panicking, how do I sort it? And how do I know the backup I've taken is a good backup? And when you start thinking in that mindset of how do I do this in a crisis, the next step of just like, I'll just jot that down somewhere. And those handbooks and that sort of, obviously the ultimate goal is to make some sort of like SOP, so a standard operating procedure, which sounds really fancy, but it's literally just a recipe for, here is my recipe for how I cook backups. Well, I do this step, I do this step, I do this step. Here's my recipe for restoring backups. I take one backup and I do this, this, and this. Once you get in the habit of building those out and writing them down, everything gets better. It means you can go on holiday. Yep. Because there's so many system administrators who can't take holidays because they're the only person in the company and nobody else knows how to do anything. Or worse, they go on holiday with a laptop, their work laptop, their phone, their work phone, and they have no space for bringing anything back in the duty free because their bag is full of tech, because they're so petrified to just leave the site in case their sites break down. So having this sort of procedure gives confidence not only to you, but it gives confidence to those around you as well. And weirdly, a lot of the times, if you do write things down and you do create these policies, you never have to use them, because by doing those steps and writing it down, you're already more positively thinking and making changes to make it all, so everything gets improved all the way through. When I used to run a company, we got asked for what were by our insurance company about what was our policy in the case of floods. Now, at the time, we were in a building in Leeds, and it was true that the River Aire was probably about 100 meters away from us. It was also about 30 meters down. So if it flooded, there was some sort of apothetical flood had occurred, and the entire of Yorkshire was wiped out. But we dutifully went through this, and then we sent back our insurance policy to the insurance company, that policy. And as a joke, we also included a zombie invasion policy. And we got critiqued, and notes came back to us about how our zombie invasion policy wasn't actually up to standard. So yeah, you can have a bit of fun, but there is a serious purpose. And I really do recommend trying to at least document some of it, and do it if you don't have to be formal about it, but sometimes being formal helps, because then you're using a common language. But so if you are going down that route, if you're not going to be formal, be simple. Use simple words. Describe it, what's happening, as simply as possible.
Yeah, no, these things are very important, because accidents happen, hacks happen, and also mistakes happen. If I may share a personal experience, when I used to be a systems engineer, we used to have the SQL database server. We used to have an NAS, a small NAS, and back then it was SCSI RAID 1 with hot swap drives and stuff. and we needed to change some drives and format. And by mistake, we pulled out the OS drives and we formatted those. I was like, oops. Exactly. And then we had like ping. How come it's not pinging? We didn't even like. And then you realize, yeah. So it doesn't have to be a hack. Even like normal accidents happen. It happens even to us here. Sometimes you're uploading some files, but especially if you're using, you click by mistake. These things happen.
Yeah.
So yeah. Good. Okay. So we spoke a bit about cleaning help. Let's look a bit about the hardening aspect. As you said, which you highlighted, it's a very important point. I think first of all, people need to understand that security is not just a one-click solution. It's a continuous process, especially even like the website is changing. It's more functionality as it is. Some functionality is changing. Users are coming in, out. Your team is growing, changing. So it's a whole process. It's not a static install the plugin. But let's say starting with the basics. You're new to these things, of course. If you read online nowadays, you find so much information, and 99%, if you're not remotely technical, you're going to get overwhelmed. What are like the basic steps, at least, from where one can start?
Well, what you do is you come online, you go to wp-security101.com and you buy the course.
Exactly. That's first.
That is clearly the first step.
Definitely.
But after that, you're sort of like, you've got to sort of, before we get into like little things like, should I change things in my wp-config file, or should I be using this software over this software? You fundamentally need to decide, first of all, what sort of like the threat model you're looking at is. Now, overwhelmingly for WordPress sites, the threat model is that we're looking about automated attacks against WordPress itself. Very few sites are hacked because of the site, as in what's the content on the site. You do get sites which might have a political bent and they might get hacked for that reason. You do get sites that have a higher level of personal information. They might get, but overwhelmingly, the vast majority of sites get hacked because an automated attack has managed to get in, and then they're going to exploit your resources. So we just want to stop that. So our first steps, assuming that we are not running anything totally mission critical, I would say is turning on automatic updates, which gets a boo and a hiss from many people. But if we're in a position we're starting from scratch and we don't know what we're doing, turning on automatic updates means we will get updates. There is a chance things will break, but there's a chance things will break anyway. And if all you're doing when you're manually updating is updating and then walking away, then there's no benefit to you pressing the buttons. You might as well get something else. Unless you have a good testing regime, most people's versions of updating is to update everything, go to the homepage and go, oh yeah, it looks like it's up, and then wander off. If you're doing that, just turn on automatic updates and just turn on the normal WordPress automatic updates. There are smarter updating solutions. There are fancier ones. There are ones that you can make fit. You can do a whole range of tests before, do your backup, then do a whole range of tests afterwards. But if you're absolutely brand new to this, turn on automatic updates. The second thing is, if you are the only person on the site, then go and install a two-factor authentication plugin. If you have, and this is where I'm going to sort of step away from the Melapress brand for 2 seconds. I have two plugins that I recommend, one of which is Melapress, but I have two plugins that I recommend. If you are on your own and you're the only person running on that site, then the 2-factor plugin that's done by the WordPress security contributors team is the one that I would recommend to most people if you're on your own. But if you need to enforce 2FA, i.e. you have multiple people, well, it doesn't do that. You have to ask people politely, have you installed your 2FA yet? Have you installed your 2FA yet?
No,
have you installed it? No. And the answer is no, obviously. So if you want to enforce it, then yeah, the folks at Melapress have their WP-2FA, which allows you to like select by roles. But more importantly, for most sites, that means you can just blanketly say, you will have it installed. And even if you select email as your 2FA method, if we've got automatic updates and those two things installed, we are already 99% better off than everybody else. And then we can start layering the extra stuff on. Yeah. But those are the two basic ones. if I was allowed a third one, I'd also probably say force people to use really long passwords. Because while WordPress will tell you that your password is really weak, it will also let you still set it. So if we could force people and say, no, you can't do that. You have to have a 16 or 32 character password. Then we're in a really good position. And as I say, we can layer other stuff on top of that.
Yeah. Now, it's a good point you're mentioning this, because earlier on this year, PatchSec and Sucuri co-released a report based on the statistics of hacks they've seen and stuff. And the first two most common threats are credentials issues, weak passwords, lack of 2FA, etc. And the second one, which you mentioned, is outdated software. So by just doing those two, you'll be way far ahead. Of course, there are other solutions, firewalls, and technologies which have their place and use definitely in certain environments. But if you start just with those two, you are way ahead of the curve, quite frankly. In fact, talking about the extra stuff, firewall, a bit of a hot topic question. Plugin firewall or proxy online service?
Neither.
Neither.
There are pros and cons to both. And look, if someone comes to me and they have a WordPress security plugin installed that's like a firewall-y type thing, I'm not going to tell them no, take it off. But at the same time, I'm going to tell them, is it providing you with nice, warm, comforting feelings? And if they say yes, it's like, you keep that on then, because it's not really doing that much for you outside of that. It's a little harsh. They do a web application firewall via a proxy. If it's something like Cloudflare, we'll be doing a lot of preventative stuff in terms of bad bots and bad traffic coming through. And if you pay for their WordPress security sort of add-on bits, it does some stuff. But when I worked for a hosting company, we found you were as likely to be hacked if you had one of the WordPress firewall plugins on as if you weren't. The type of hack was slightly different, but there was no difference in the percentage-wise of whether or not you were likely to be hacked.
Yeah, makes sense.
It's
because it's always the weakest links, the user problems and the outdated software, which again, outdated software is the user problem.
Yeah, these firewalls. So the things like your WordFence and your WordFence is a good example where it's not really even a firewall, a WAF in its traditional sense. It's more closer to what PatchStack do with their virtual patching-esque, which is putting in those rules. What I would say is, if you are using something like that and they have a delay, if you're using a free version and they're giving you a delay, then it's absolutely worthless. And the number of people I see have installed one of these plugins, and then you have to tell them, you only get updates every 14 days, right? And they're like, yes. Like, that means 14 days of no updates, right? Yes. And you can start to see the penny dropping. It's like, so it's worthless. Just update your software. But generally, if you are keeping your software up to date, they still have potentially have their place, but they are a lot less benefit. Where these things can be really more useful is if you've got a client who, for some reason, cannot keep things up to date, they can't use various patching methods, then this acts as like last moment, throw a shield and hope and pray that this is going to be better. But yeah, generally, I'm not in favor of either. Now, that said, I am in favor if you have some server-side based. So if you're using something like Mod Security, Naxaki, similar, and they're running like a modified version of the OWASP top 10 rule sets attached to them, they're getting rid of the common things. So in a similar way to Cloudflare is doing. And Cloudflare is another one where it's not a terrible thing to have in front. And Cloudflare does have the benefits of, and Security is a similar, where they will be getting rid of a lot of the bad bots, so you're not having to deal with them. But yeah, if you can do it on the server side. The other reason to not do it on the WordPress side is that by the time it's doing anything, the bad actors already managed to trigger something in WordPress because it's triggering that plugin. And while you can do things like pre-append, that's even more scary. And to give us sort of like a final nail in the coffin, one of my favorite hacks I saw not so long ago, but I've seen it over the years in various forms. Most of these plugins have like a they might call it wp-php or some similar thing that they'll put in the root of the WordPress folder, and it will take anything that you had in your pre-append and put it in there because they don't want to break your site.
Of course.
So they put it in there. Of course, that's the one file they can't scan because they have no idea what legitimately should be in there. So the best place to put your malware is in the WAF.
Yeah, it's a very good point you mentioned. The plugin firewall is like the fact that the plugin firewall is triggered. It means that the request has already reached your WordPress installation, so it's already part of the application layer. It's already reached your server. So there's a difference when you have a proxy server. So this is the basics. So keep your software up to date, strong credentials, 2FA, and you already like covered well and safe more than the mass. Let's go a bit more advanced. A small plug for your course, wp-security101.com, right?
Yeah.
In one of the chapters, you talk about browser security, and you mentioned the word security headers, and I've seen it used. It's becoming more common in the last few years. For those who don't know, can we start like what are security headers? What's browser security is, and like how does, because we're talking about website security, firewalls, and 2FA. So how does browser security fit in this whole picture, and what security headers are?
So security headers, browser security as a concept is basically, it's almost like a WAF inside in your browser, or rather the website can send a set of headers that says, hey, I'm going to tell you, the browser, what things I'm going to do and expect to be doing. And if I'm doing anything outside of this little group of things that I'm saying I'm doing, you probably shouldn't act on it, and you probably shouldn't let me do it. Now, the first one of those that's sort of is the HSTS header, which is basically strict transport security header. And it says, hey, if you're on HTTP, never load me. I should always be loaded over HTTPS. And most headers send something like what the command is. They normally have some sort of expiry time. Now, you can completely screw a site up with HSTS because it has this extra wonderful parameter called include subdomains. So if I run example.com and I have a HSTS header set up, I can say, right, for the next year, if you come to http://example.com, I want you to automatically go to HTTPS. Now, as a browser, the first time I visit, I'll get sent that header and I'll go, oh, okay. But the next time I visit, if I was to go follow the link http://example.com, the browser, before it even tries to talk to the site, will go, huh, no, I remember this. I'm not meant to go to HTTP. It told me I only go to HTTPS. So it does the redirect, which you would normally expect the server to have to send back the request and go through. This is an example of a one type header. But allow subdomains means that you can also say, if you go to my brand new subdomain.example.com and you arrive, even though the browser's never been to that site, it knows that the parent said include the subdomains. So it will go to that one over HTTPS, which is great until you're trying to set up your dev site and you forget to enroll an encryption certificate of any sort. And then you're sitting there wondering why everything's broken.
Yeah.
But that's a really good example of one. We have loads of other variations of these policies. And we used to have like individual headers for everything. These days, though, they are sort of splitting down. We've got like the permission policy, we've got a features policy, and the big one, which is the content security policy, which is a global sort of like a container of everything. And in a content security policy, you can say images. Okay, I am going to say you should only load images from my site and that site over there. You shouldn't load any other images. So if you then go on, your browser opens up the page and it sees that there's an image from badsite.com, it goes, I'm not meant to open that, so I'll just won't show it. I'll say no, I'm going to decline it. Images that possibly doesn't make as much sense for, but when we suddenly say you can do that for JavaScript, it suddenly makes a lot more sense because now we can say, hey, JavaScript over there, evil.com JavaScript shouldn't be run on this page. You can run a content security policy for specific pages or groups of pages or the entire site. So you, for example, on your checkout on your shopping cart, you can have a content security policy that's really strict that says nothing should be loading. You shouldn't be getting any extra JavaScript from these random other sources. They should just be coming from us. And you can even verify it to say, look, if we haven't provided a nonce for this, which is a one-time regenerating token that can be used to prove that, hey, actually, the server generated this data, then you shouldn't load it. Or if we have actually hashed and checked some of this, and we do something called an SRI hash, that you shouldn't load this unless the hashes match. So that means that if somebody has manipulated it and add extra content into that, then it will come back saying, no, I'm not going to load that. So it's a really powerful set of tools. The problem is that building a content security policy is a pain. And so what actually happens is people put a content security policy that says allow everything, because that's they're trying to get past a tick box on a somewhere where it says like you must have a content security policy. It's like unsafe everything, anything in line, that's fine. It's all okay. You can evaluate everything. So it's rare to see people building good content security policies, especially if you're in a scenario where you've got like, I don't know, you've got YouTube videos on your site. Well, that's fun because now you have to deal with all the, when you load that YouTube video, you're not loading just one script and one iframe, you're loading a dozen scripts and a dozen iframes, and often from different Google servers, some of which are going to be points of presence. So it will say things like, I'm loading up from US 1-425, and you've got, okay, God, I'm going to down the security policy. If you're using stuff like Google AdWords, you're just doomed because it loads just so much stuff. It's almost impossible. If you try to do a content security policy for the WordPress admin area, you're equally going to find that so much of the admin area is inline scripts, and plugin developers don't know any better. So they'll just go, yeah, I know, I will put stuff into the footer and just randomly write JavaScript in there, which means that you can't then do any hash checking or nonsense on them. So it is a bit of a pain, but if you can get it working for your site, especially if you've got anything sensitive, it's well worth trying.
Yeah, no, it is. I remember when I used to work as a systems engineer around like 15 years ago at the early days of CSP, Content Security Policy, we had set up ours. But yeah, especially, I don't know nowadays because I haven't touched these things in quite a while, but
back then it was called P3P.
Yeah, but yeah, exactly. Yeah. But like we had a CDN, we had firewalls and stuff, like to get all the policies, as you're saying, all the policies. Sometimes it was tempted like, listen, accept all, just we're happy, just accept from everything, everywhere. But yeah, and especially nowadays, with good point you're mentioning, things like YouTube and stuff, they have of course CDN, so you can coming up with finding the right addresses, the right maybe subnets, and it can become really, really difficult. Since we talk about browser policy, then of course there comes what I would like to call the weakest link in the WordPress, the user. Unfortunately, even like I'm not technical or not, everyone makes mistakes, but of course, even less technical people, they can put your website at risk. Now, as a team grows, for example, it's normally you might have, they don't need to have admin access, but if you have an e-commerce solution, for example, and you have some sort of store manager, they will have access to some particular settings like stock quantities, prices, orders, and stuff. So they can do mistakes as well. You earlier mentioned, okay, you can enforce 2FA, you can enforce strong passwords. What are the best practices we should teach the non-technical users? So making sure at least, or how can we help non-technical users help us keep our own website secure?
Okay, so first thing sort of like is to help them by reducing down what stresses they're going to have. So you said, you have like a store manager role. In practice, I very rarely see someone who actually has been given the store manager role, who they will be given the administrator role. So
exactly, yeah, it's the easiest way out always.
Yeah. So if the first thing we can do is to go, okay, actually, we know that they should be store managers. Let's make them store managers. Let's take away a bunch of stuff. So we're reducing down that threat surface for them anyway. So getting the right roles for the right users is a good starting point. We can use both a carrot and a stick method, because ultimately we do want them to be using 2FA, and the best way to do that is to enforce it. But we also should make it as painless as possible. So I'd love everybody to be using a authenticator type app or a hardware token, but pragmatically, if they're going to use email, that's fine. If they're going to send a text message, that's okay, as long as they're doing something. So we can implement that. Again, same with passwords. We can't actually tell them to use a password. Well, we can tell them. We can't actually force them to use a password manager, but we can make things harder for them. So by increasing the complexity, and by that I mean length of a password, I'm very much in favor of not having complexity in passwords, just having length.
Just length, yeah.
So the longer, basically long and unique trumps complicated and weird. So I'd much rather you have a 32 character, really long string ID that's totally random, that's stored in a password manager. And sure, it can have uppercase, lowercase letters, special characters, all that jazz. But I'm more interested in the fact it's 32 characters long. That's where I'd love everybody to be. But realistically, 16 characters is about the point that a human could probably manage to remember it. So if you did have that person who insists that they can't use a password manager and they can remember things, 16 is about the point where they could just about remember it. So that's probably your sweet spot. But the nice thing is that 16 characters, they probably are having to make a unique password, because nobody else is going to be forcing them to do that. If they're the sort of person who is trying to remember things, chances are they've got loads of 8-character ones that they've got these little tricks to remember things, and then your 16 is going to be nice and long. So forcing a 16-character password or higher, enforcing 2FA helps them out massively. But the bigger thing is to just actually tell them, hey, here are the risks. Here are some things to watch out for. A couple of things to make sure they understand that this is what our emails look like. This is what our security emails look like. So if you get an email, come talk to one of us. If you come talk to us, as the person who's sort of enforcing policies, you also have to show them what every step of that process looks like. And if you don't, then you shouldn't be surprised when they're phished.
Yeah. No, you're right. And you'd be surprised, even like some of the most experienced people can. I mean, like a few weeks ago or a few months ago, Troy Hunt, I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's one of the, he was his, I don't know if it's MailChimp, anyway, his mail service account was hacked through some phishing. And we're talking about Troy Hunt, who's like really like at the front of these things. He even spoke in front of the US Senate. So it can happen to everyone.
Yeah, I had a colleague who was sitting on the phone talking to a client, went into to do something, saw an email, went and clicked it, and I'm there watching him and going, stop. It's like, what? It's like, step back, look at the email again, look at it carefully. And he's like, oh, as he realized he'd just clicked on a phishing email. And he clicked on the phishing email, and about 2 seconds later, the legitimate email came in. But of course, because he wasn't looking, he was looking for an email for the website. He just clicked on the first one he saw, which was a phishing email. So it happens to absolutely everyone. This is a person who used to train people on spotting phishing emails. So it will happen to you. And anybody who says it's not going to happen to them, it will eventually. Especially, we are in a world where it used to be really easy to spot things like phishing emails because of the spelling mistakes and the weird grammar. And I don't know why bad actors are particularly bad at spelling, but they are atrocious at it. But annoyingly, they've all learned that ChatGPT will correct it for them.
Yeah, they're improving. I've received the last few weeks, actually, someone from our marketing team just forwarded some emails like, that looks good. That looks like some of them have become like really good emails, even in spelling. So yeah, they're using ChatGPT or something. Even like the grammar, and not just the grammar, like the text. It's really good text. So like, wow, yeah, they're improving. Tim, there's so much more I'd like to discuss with you. In fact, I have a whole list, but yeah, we need to start closing. anything we missed? Anything important you'd like to share before we stop this session?
So when we were sort of like talking about putting those layers in, and I said, right, the first one layer is get automatic updates. The second layer is to talk about the users. The third layer is to talk about monitoring, because we've sort of already sort of like, oh, when you can do this, you can see from the alerts, you can but if you were to have that third layer, it's to put in that sort of both a user level monitoring, but also to have some sort of understanding of what your server logs are showing. Even if you are not going to ever actively go digging in there yourself to know where they are to allow somebody else. But if you are technical minded, just making sure that you can set up alerts for a plugin has been installed, a plugin has been deleted, and my personal favorite, so you have logged in to your WordPress site. That last one is really useful, so that when you wake up in the morning and go, I wasn't in Peru last night, that's probably not me.
Yeah.
You'll be able to see just those 3 alerts on their own will help you identify so many potential points of a compromise. Just don't go overboard and put lots of alerts on, because then they become noisy and you stop reading them. But those 3 combined should be enough that there shouldn't be much noise, but they should be your critical ones to say, oh, something's wrong.
Very good point you mentioned this, because we are often asked, like, which notifications should be enabled or so. And as you said, there are the obvious ones, like a new plugin is installed or you logged into your website. But there are a lot of cases where, like, as the website owner, you are the one who knows most the website, who knows when certain users log in, from where they log in, what they should be doing or not. So then it's really up to you. If you want more comprehensive notifications, then it's up to you to configure what type of notifications. But it's also a very good point, because I was guilty of this in the past. When you receive too many notifications, you say, yeah, okay, yes, I'm used to this. And there might be a really important one that you will miss for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Tim. Where can people find you, get in touch with you, learn about your work, or even hire you?
So you can find me at timnash.co.uk. I am, as I say, available for hire. And you can also find me on wp-security101.com. I do social media. I do it really badly. So you can occasionally find me on LinkedIn. You can occasionally find me on Blue Sky. I actually have a Mastodon account. It's at myself and Ross Wintle, who is a WordPress dev. Between us, we own crikey.social. And so you can find me at tnash at crikey.social on Mastodon as well.
Actually, by the way, I really like your short. Lately you've been posting short videos on LinkedIn, like 20, 30 seconds, some of them 1 minute, like just explain. Your last one was something about application passwords. They're actually good snippets. So you're much better than you think, then, most probably. So yeah, you're doing well. You're welcome. Thanks a lot. Thanks everyone for following us. Yeah, please like and subscribe, and we'll see you next Thursday at 4 p.m. Central European time. Thanks a lot. See you next week. Thanks everyone. Thank you, Tim.
Bye.